who's ready to put this thing in this thing? This guy. Well, okay, I'm not ready, but first thing we got to do is move this out of the way, connect this to the transmission, connect it to the hoist, put it in the position, make our motor mounts, take it back out, weld everything, put it back in, connect everything, put gas in it and drive it. So what, like 20 minutes? Let's get going. First thing we got to do is make a list. Expensive. You just need a strong mounting point, but man, they come in so handy. I use them for pick up a refrigerator, anything that's heavy that you want to lift. Nice, easy, nice and easy. It's how we bake a cake. Clean the toilet bowl. Well, the next thing we got to do is get the transmission attached to the engine so we can put everything in and check all our clearances yet again. It's true the plan has changed. It was originally going to be a 4L60, but now I've got this perfectly good 700 R4. So even though we've made some clearance for the 4L60, which is really close in size, I'll bring this down a bit. Back up some. There. The same. Now let me see if I can kind of wrestle this thing onto this cart. Oh, this is a great idea. Pretty well balanced, but when I go to put it in the Cadillac, it needs to be kind of at a harsh angle, so we will we're just going to hook it from the very front, drop it in there, and then I'll put something roller underneath the back and it'll be just fine, maybe. Perhaps. tail heavy now. Yeah, that should drop in there nicely. Okie dokie, we've got a pretty good alignment going on here. So let me set it to where you can see it fall. I mean, gently drop into place. Now, because we're about to put the engine and transmission in the way, I need to finish cleaning up the areas where the motor mounts are going to mount, so I can weld the motor mounts in place when I'm ready to do that, and I won't have to try to clean around. Well, here we are. Easiest way to do it is just to get in the engine compartment, because there's plenty of room in here, I gotta tell you. So I'm going to make sure I get this whole area here nice and clean on both of these. I should have marked where the mounts were going to be, but I remember they were pretty close to this hump thing. So okay, so since this engine is just going to go straight up and hopefully about straight back down, I should be able to index by putting this little cart before the Cadillac horse. And when I roll the Cadillac under the engine, if I put that spot where I want the tail of the transmission to hit behind the cross member, I should be able to lower the engine down, hit that thing, then inch the Cadillac forward and let the engine kind of fall, or lower down that way, and I'll catch the back part of the pan on this cart thing, this little flat roller, so I can put a hydraulic jack under the front of the pan, and you know, that's about a 4-inch gap there. And that'll get, and this thing can start rolling backwards also. As the engine goes down, I can roll the Cadillac forward, you know, boom, 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 like that. That's my thought anyway. Now comes the hard part. I got to shimmy under there, strap up the transmission, get it in position, secure it somehow, and then move it over to the lift so we can work on it. Just for fun, I'll show you how nicely it fit in here. It's tilted a little far back right now, but it's still hanging from the cable, and it has room to maneuver around. The main pulley will not hit the sway bar. The front of the oil pan will be close to the cross member, as it should be. Plenty of the room for the back to come up. I'm a little tight on the steering box on this side, but not bad. Once I get it, you know, make some adjustments, it'll be a little, the back of the mount will be a little close to the steering box, but not bad, not bad at all. Engine and transmission are now ratchet strapped into place. The transmission is held up with a ratchet strap, and the engine is held in place, well, with a couple of ratchet straps. And it's not sitting exactly where it's going to be, but it's close. And now I can move the vehicle around and throw it on the lift. I just have to move everything. So let me get after that. situated to go up on the lift. But before I start going underneath and checking things, I'm going to go ahead and remove this big bracket. It's got some sort of maybe vacuum operated anti-stall dash pot, and this big fulcrum here. I may have to switch to a cable. I'd like to keep the original cable and maybe even the original rod linkage, but we will see. I definitely want to keep the original gas pedal, but I might have to convert it to a cable for the engine. But it's so big and bulky and it sticks out about 2.5 inches. I'd like to get as close to the firewall as possible so I have good clearance here, and for the steering linkage underneath, which I will show you in a bit. So I'm just gonna remove this vacuum hose and take these couple of bolts out and unpin it from the throttle linkage underneath. Pretty much everything else, doesn't look like there's really anything else in the way on the back of the engine here. This is the throttle bracket that I just removed. You can see it's kind of big and clunky, but it's so neat. You can adjust full throttle right there. And this sort of thing went to a vacuum hose so that if you accelerated hard and lost vacuum, this piston would come out. And if you let off of it immediately, it would keep your idle high enough so your engine wouldn't die until it regained vacuum. And then this would sink back in and bring your idle back down to where it was supposed to be. Simple and elegant system. I hope I can retain this thing because it's cool. It's not as light or efficient as a throttle cable, but so what's next, you may ask? Well, you may ask. Go ahead. Well, I'll tell you. The logical thing in my mind would be to support the transmission in such a way that its tail housing is at the right level, but it can still slide fore and aft a little bit so that we can get the engine right where we need it. So in other words, not a transmission mount, but a transmission shelf that has a little bit of movement that we can adjust things around, because we're close. We're probably within an inch or two of where we want to be. 22. We're going to make the transmission stay in place vertically, but have movement front to rear, and then we'll figure out everything else. So here we are underneath this big beautiful Cadillac, and this is the tail housing for the transmission. These bolts are where the original transmission cross member went, and it looks like a pretty good match. Of course, there's going to be a rubber mount on this thing, but we can check and see if that original piece will at least hold it at the right height or close to it, so we can move around and figure out what clearances we need to make, if any. So we'll let's check that out. First thing I'm going to do is clean both sides of the inner frame rail and clean the old transmission cross member. So that'll take a minute. Well, since I'll be taking this thing off and on again a few times, I hit the bolts with a shot of Penetro 90 because molybdenum is fun to say, and will help these bolts go in and out of these old rusty bolt holes. Oops. I was only 100% wrong. Well, that thing put up a fight. I ended up putting a ratchet strap on it and getting one side started and pulling it back towards the rear of the car with a bit of tension to draw it in. It probably tightens up the frame a little bit. At any rate, we now have a little gap here about 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to find something to secure to the top of this so the transmission can slide back a little bit if it needs to. Well, here's the sketchy idea. I just need this to sit on this so I can make some adjustments and check some things and raise and lower the engine using the transmission jack. So I'm just going to secure it pulling backwards, really is all I need to do, because it's going to sit on this metal. So I'm just going to use a ratchet strap, and I put a couple of bolts in this front mount area, and I'm just going to put a little tension on this strap, because really I just need to keep it from sliding forward. And even if it does slide forward, it'll just land on the tail shaft, but I want to keep it on this flat part here for now. How about here? There. Now that puts a little tension on it. As you can, just move back a little, see? Perfect. I still want to put a little spacer on here because it's right about the perfect height. I thought it would be. How about this? Nope. How about 2 of these? Oh yeah. I like that. Perfect. Now let's take the pressure off the jack and stand clear just in case. And that's it. It is sitting on the cross member. Now I can move this to the now I can set the transmission jack under the oil pan here and maneuver things around up here and make sure everything's going to clear the way I need it to up here. Okay, I have stared at this long enough. Here's our safety thing, and just so you know where on the transmission we are, this is the housing for the proportioning valve and the modular plug for the lockup converter and the micro spool cover plate. The whole transmission needs to go up and possibly back a little bit. I'm just going to clearance from here, since I know it's going to move back just a little bit, right here at this body seam, all the way back to the micro spool cover and up to the top of the hump. And that'll give us a nice big barn door for all this room, because we definitely want to be able to plug in our lockup converter. Now on the other side of the transmission, let me move the OptiGrab here. Okay, on the other side of the transmission we have the servo housing. It needs to also go up and possibly back a little, so we're going to knock out a big, put a dent right here also. So the idea is to drill a couple of index holes so I know where this thing needs to go. The transmission also needs to go a little bit to the left. So I'm going to make an extra little bit of room here for it to go up and to the left, and probably make too much room. Because really, why not? Let's go on up here. Come into about here. All right, we're in there. And we will be crossing a body seam, because we then need to go back to about here. think that'll probably do. Now on the inside, we just connect the dots, and I think we're gonna go straight up towards the hump and remove this whole piece here. And we'll have to do a little bit of metal work, but it won't be the end of the world. Well, here we go with the slice and dice. We're going to vacuum everything, of course. And there's our marks. You can see the little index holes there and there. Just connect the dots and go straight up from there. We're going to go all the way to that insulation and see if that's enough. We can always remove more, but this Cadillac has a bolted on sort of channel that goes from the front to the rear, and it's probably for the heat. I haven't actually checked it out, but we'll open this up, then we'll go to the other side and open up the other one and see if we have enough room. Should be. Cutoff wheel, but I finished it with a Dremel tool in a couple of hard to reach places. You could do the whole thing with a Dremel tool. This is not advanced fabrication. You could use a body saw, you could use a Sawzall, you could use a hacksaw blade wrapped with tape if you needed to. Don't be afraid to try to jam something in that doesn't go. I mean, but it just needs a couple of lumps in the transmission tunnel. Lump technology is not out of your grasp. You could do it. Next thing is for additional clearance checking, we're going to go ahead and bolt the exhaust manifolds on. The engine is still just sort of suspended by ratchet straps, but it's in such a way that if they failed, it would just land on the cross member. In fact, I've got a piece of wood under the oil pan, and it would just sit on the cross member. It wouldn't come tumbling out. Well, I believe we've gotten the height of our transmission is pretty much as high as we want to go, because we're still going to need room for those lines. I might have to trim that a bit more. We're up against the opening there. This is going to be our height. So I leave the transmission jack here. We're going to take this down and we're going to make a cross member that'll hold the mount in this position. That's the next thing, and then we'll fabricate motor mounts right here. Okay, got our measurement of the installed transmission mount, and the reason you measure it installed, I'll show you. You take the measurement with it installed because of this here. This is a preload plate. It's not a spacer. It's called a preload plate, and it's there for a reason. But it squishes the urethane down a little bit, so you install it completely. Take your measurement, then we'll install the cross member, measure from there to here, because it's sitting right where we want it, and that'll give us the measurement we need to cut out of the cross member for this to fit. Mathematics 22. Here's our transmission cross member, front facing me. I've marked out how deep we need to go with this, which is almost exactly halfway, coincidentally, and how wide we need to go, because this is going to sit down here and a little closer to the front, somewhere right about here. So we'll slice this up, flip it, weld it back in, make the holes line up to these holes, and Robert is your mother's brother. There we go, we'll be done. As we intend to entertain and inform, there's a asymmetrical design to these. There's a bulge. That bulge goes towards the rear of the vehicle. And again, this is not a spacer. This is a preloading plate. So if you're going to go to the trouble of getting the good urethane bushing, then you might as well install it correctly. Well, now we see the expertly trimmed out cross member, and we can see where we need to mount our mounting plate. So it'll just be a matter of marking that, figuring out how we want to weld it up, and welding it up. So really only about 3/4 inch lower than stock puts this transmission about where it needs to be if you're doing this at home. Okay, so why did I cut it the way I did? I'm just going to explain this real quick. You can't tell by just a cursory look, but if you look down the end, you will see that this thing is sort of trapezoidal. This angle is acute, and this one's a little bit obtuse. I don't know if you can see that. So this angle will match, if I invert it and rotate it, it'll match the angle of the back thing. So there's our stepped down transmission mount. We'll weld here, we'll weld here. And here we have our ready to test fit transmission cross member. I've enlarged the bolt holes. They might need to get a little bit more this way, but we might also send the transmission back a little bit that way. We can at least test fit it and let the transmission sit on the mount on the cross member, and then move the engine around. So that's exciting. Transmission mount looks great. It might need a little adjustment, but there's no big surprise there. The engine is suspended by the transmission mount and ratchet straps in the front. I wanted to build the whole thing with parts I had in stock, but the oil pan is just a little too tall. So I bit the bullet. I spent $135 on a 302 pan, and it's going to be like 3 inches shorter. We'll have better clearance. We'll be able to get the engine a little lower. Take 22. While we've got the engine and transmission back out to change the oil pan, we've got another list, everybody's favorite. Here's what we got going on. While the engine is out of the caddy, we're going to straighten this front support, install the exhaust gaskets, and put the manifolds on, hopefully permanently. Install the flywheel and the torque converter, the starter, the crank sensor, because that's a pain to do once the starter's in. Go ahead and find some bolts to ground the wiring harness, because they'll ground on the back of the heads, and we'll make sure we have those. Pre-oil the engine, clean and paint the cross member. Well, the motor mounts we'll do once it's all back in there. Check the drive shaft yoke on the off chance the old original Cadillac. It won't be, but we'll check it. A little more trimming on the transmission clearance. Replace the steering joint on the steering shaft, and we'll go ahead and install the water pump housing and the power steering pump to make sure we have good clearance when everything's sitting in place. We'll have all the accessories, the exhaust manifolds, everything will be where it's going to live, and then we'll finally be able to put the motor mounts in place and weld them permanently there. So let's get after this little list here. It's late, but we'll see what we can get done before we lose consciousness. the transmission is separated from the engine, and now we just have a short list of a lot of stuff to do. Well, one of the things that is apparently going to be obstructing where we mount the motor mounts is those brake lines right there, or that brake line. It goes from here, it winds back to here, and it goes to a fitting right there. I could take it loose and then try to reroute it, but I'm going to just try to grab it and gently maneuver it sort of on top of this hump. That works pretty well. We got both sides moved. I think it'll do for engine installation. Now the next thing on the list, it just bothers me. This is nice and straight, and that, I don't know if you can tell, is bent pretty significantly. It's got a big bow in it. Somebody bottomed out on something, or somebody tried to jack it up with that. So to fix that, it takes a very specialized tool called a 2x4. I'm gonna put the 2x4 in there like such, and I'm gonna hit it a few times with a sledgehammer and straighten that out. Oh, that's nice and straight. That's much better. That didn't go as quickly as I thought. I was going to time lapse the whole thing, but I found the exhaust collectors we're going to need for the engine here. That's good. So here's our new steering joint, made out of modern materials instead of the fiber that it was made out of in 1962, but it doesn't come with the top piece here. And these two posts are a little bit larger. I don't think that's going to matter. So we need to drill these rivets out here, separate this from this, and replace the lower portion. I don't know if I'm going to keep this guard on here, but I did notice they have a ground strap going from the rivet to the post, and I think we're going to try to retain that if we can. That's pretty cool. So we got to get this piece off, put it on here, and then put it back together. That was not easy. I thought I was going to run out of tools. I used drill bits and punches and finally got a grinder and took some time after it. I cleaned it with a little wire brush, and you know, there's part numbers on it. I would have never known that if I hadn't cleaned it up. So I'm going to degrease it real quick and hit it with a little light coat of spray paint. Otherwise, as soon as it gets a little wet, it's going to be rust colored, but it'll be from rust. And here's the old steering joint that was crumbling and falling apart, and here's our new piece. You know, you could use this as your daily driver for 93 years before you consumed the amount of power it would take to make a modern car. Keeping these things running is economic practicality. I can't justify it. I just want to do it. I like this big old Cadillac, and I like a big V8 in it. I might have made those numbers up. You'll have to Googleize them yourself. That's all we have time for this week. I've got to do body work on the Nova tonight because I actually do have a schedule to get it in paint tomorrow. So next week, we'll have the engine going back in the Cadillac. We'll finish this list off of stuff to do to the engine while it's out. And I don't want to jinx myself, but that might be the last time the engine needs to go in before things are connected, juiced up, and running it up and down the road to test everything. We're close. It doesn't look like it because there's a big empty cavern here, but we're close. So we'll see you on the next video. Thanks for watching, as always.